going on, you guys? Welcome to another edition of SEC Talk with Holden and Cody. We are live. I guess we're live on video. Yeah, sort of. We're live in person and what have you. Not necessarily live on any kind of streaming services or anything like that, but
I hope we're live. If not, this is record. There's an issue.
we got bigger issues going on if it's not, right? Well, anyways, we're here on Sunday evening shooting this for you guys for Monday. Again, you guys on YouTube, you won't see our faces on here. Internet issues as usual. So again, you'll hear Cody through the phone recording again, which is not the greatest quality, but hey, we're getting it to you at least, and you'll still be able to hear us and all that fun jazz. Anyway, Cody, an interesting weekend of football. It was a Halloween weekend, so
it definitely was a unique weekend.
Yeah. Not so much necessarily around the SEC, because as we get to later, we'll jump into our picks. And most everything happened the way that we thought it was, with exception to one.
One game, I don't know what happened in that game, but apparently a football team finally decided to show up and play football.
Yeah. That's right. So we'll jump into that. We're going to start it off. We're going to run through the top 25 here in just a minute. We got some injuries that we're going to update you guys on. Another little bit of a scuffle that happened in the SEC. Obviously, then we'll go around the SEC games. We've got our Crimson Dog of the Week for you, a couple of them to come through. We'll run back through our picks, run through the East and West rankings. Then we'll run through a few games outside of the league that were pretty interesting through the weekend. Then we'll jump through our Under the Lights segment, which is our high school football segment of the weekend. Cody, you want to start us off with a little bit of news around the league?
Yeah, we have a source up at Auburn who shared two big things with me. One of them is safety. I forgot. Jermaine Sherwood re-injured his ankles. From what I was reading, he has had previous injuries with both of his ankles before. So he re-injured them, but with Auburn having a bye week this week, it does help give them time to kind of get him back going. And the other somewhat big news is linebacker KJ Barrett is liable to return sooner than they were initially thinking. I think they said that they're planning on him being back for the Iron Bowl, so that'll help out that Auburn defense there.
Yeah, KJ Barrett definitely is he's a key point and pivotal point there for the defense of Auburn. One of the other injuries for you outside of the state of Georgia is Richard LeCount. After they fly back from the Kentucky game from Lexington and get back in Athens, I think it was just about an hour later, Richard LeCount got in a motorcycle accident that he was driving a motorcycle and hit a car in oncoming traffic and then hit another. The sources that I've been reading said that he is in the hospital, non-life-threatening injuries, luckily to be alive in the first place, especially being on a motorcycle. Does have a concussion, some bruised ribs, and a shoulder injury. Will miss a few weeks, possibly the rest of the season. We'll see how things shake out with that. Big game coming this weekend for the Dogs, playing Florida. So you hate to miss him, especially after that Georgia-Kentucky game. Georgia's defense lost a lot. I think they lost 5 to 6 guys in the game alone, not counting a few of the guys who were already absent previous to that game. So injuries is going to play a key factor in this week around the SEC. Like you say, luckily Auburn has got the bye week. A couple of teams have bye weeks, so they're going to be able to get some stuff going. I think, Cody, you told me there's only 4 games this weekend, but one of those 4 games is Georgia-Florida, which usually decides the East. And this year so far it looks like it could line up to decide the East, which we'll jump into a little bit more between Georgia and Florida coming up. But that's some of the biggest.
We're on the subject of Florida.
Yeah.
Let's get into the biggest, I think, news of the weekend was the WWE match between Florida and Mizzou up there at halftime. If you haven't seen it yet, which I'm sure most of you have, there was a controversy hit on Kyle Trask right there at halftime. To me, it looked like it was a late hit. I mean, the ball was clearly out of his hands a good, I'll say, 2 seconds. And the guy came in and delivered a hard hit to Kyle Trask. Well, Florida's offense took offense to that, and of course, they're going to back up their quarterback, and all met it right there just outside just outside midfield. Started trash talking. The coaches tried to get involved and separate them, but there was some swings thrown and some punches landed. But out of all of that, only 3 players were actually ejected as a result of this fight. Mizzou only had 1 guy, linebacker Trey Williams, was ejected. Florida had 2 defensive linemen, Zach Carter and Antoine Powell, with all 3 ejected. And and it says that every player on both teams was assessed with an unsportsmanlike penalty. And then, of course, Dan Mullen, being Dan Mullen, gets the crowd pumped up into it right as they're going back into the locker room. So,
yeah, that was a little unprofessional by him, in my opinion. I was listening to what Roman was saying on the SEC network, and he said that he thinks that nobody should be suspended. There should be no issues with what happened, that it was something that was worth doing for the Florida players and everything, and that nobody should have any issues with what happened. Well, I do, and regardless of who you're a fan of, Dan Mullen going out there and instigating that is ridiculous. If you look at the video, he's right in the middle. Granted, he's trying to pull people apart. Well, then you got coaches pulling him apart from other people. And if the other side of that is, if Lane Kiffin can be fined $25,000 for tweeting at the SEC, how in the world is Dan Mullen either not being suspended for a period of time or not being fined even heftier than what Lane Kiffin was for being on the field and having to be held back by players, by teammates, and by coaches? What in the world, Dan Mullen? And I get it, the Florida players, as far as, you kind of get hyped up and, you get in the moment, and when you get a bunch of guys riled up together like that, punches are going to be thrown, and like you say, a couple are landed, a few guys get ejected. I'm sure through this week they're going to go through and they'll review it, and they'll look at the guys and probably hand out some suspensions. But I'm going to tell you what, if Dan Mullen comes out of this unscathed, especially if it's because, they've got a big game coming this weekend against Georgia, that's ridiculous.
I will say this, and I think you'll agree with me on this too. And say the SEC does review it and they don't hand out nothing, there's going to be one coach that's going to pop up and say something. And it's the one that just got fined for $25,000. I am willing to bet Lane Kiffin will come out and say something just because he has that history of doing it.
Yeah, he'll probably get fined another 2.5 million pennies too to be able to say anything about it. And I will also say I'd be surprised that if you don't hear from Nick Saban, I'd be surprised if he doesn't put his 2 cents in the barrel there with Lane to say, hey, we can't do this. What are we? I get. You get Mike Leach that comes in there at Mississippi State. He is a character kind of guy. But Dan Mullen, what in the world? That's just unprofessional. Now, Florida may very well come in there and just smoke Georgia this upcoming weekend. But that right there, the week previous, that's just ridiculous. Whether they have the suspensions or not, you got to play it on the field. And obviously in the second half of that game, Florida took off with it without those few guys. And with all that's to come, so obviously we'll jump into that. But my goodness, that was a bit ridiculous on at least from my perspective.
Keep an eye out through the week, because I'm sure the SEC's going. If they haven't already started, they'll probably start a little investigation on that game. We've already, last week we talked about the refereeing, some of their questionable calls. Well, it continues again this week. Some of these plays that they're calling or not calling, it needs to be addressed.
Yeah.
And with something like that, I think if they would have thrown the flag for the late hit on Kyle Trask or roughing the passer, you wouldn't have seen that fight.
No.
I'm almost willing to bet.
More than likely not.
But at the same time, it goes back to those refs, they had to do a better job too, because it took them a little bit longer than I think it should have for them to actually get involved.
Yeah.
And the coaches were in the middle before the referees were.
Yeah, to your point on that, if the flag is thrown, Dan Mullen doesn't run out there in the middle. And if you look over, you know good and well, if you look over and you see your coach is right there next to you in the middle of this scuffle, that's going to fire you up even more and make you want to get after somebody. Whereas if Dan Mullen is either trying to pull people off or if he's staying out of it, that shouldn't escalate as much as it did.
Your head coach sets your team's tempo.
Yeah. You think Nick Saban's going to be standing out there in the middle of all that?
No.
Throw a hip out. Have to have another hip surgery. Watch out, man.
He's 69, man. He ain't gonna be going it much further. Which, by the way, if you did not know, October 31st is Nick Saban's birthday, so we do want to send out a belated happy birthday to the coach up there at Alabama.
Happy birthday, Nick.
But I mean, at the same time, like you mentioned, though, your head coach, if that flag is thrown, I don't think you'll see Dan Mullen go out there in the field.
Yeah.
If you do see him, he's going to air him. He's actually pulling his players back. He's not actually getting in the middle like he was.
Yeah.
And even then, if you go back and look at it, there's Missouri coaches, too, who are sitting there yelling at the Florida players.
Yeah, all around
that's how it looked like to me.
Yeah, it was definitely a huge cluster. You know, and like I said, we'll keep an eye on it. We'll tweet some stuff out as we find any information that comes out. Obviously, we'll update you guys at the end of the week once we prepare for the upcoming weekend. But before we do that, I'm going to run through our top 25 real quick, Cody, and we will jump into the games from this past weekend. In your top 25, let me get a little... my mouse has quit working here.
I got it pulled up. You can take over.
I got it. No big deal. I'm just trying to get this thing to work real quick. Here we go. Running through it, the top 5 stays the same. Clemson still at the top at 7-0. Alabama in second. Ohio State third. Notre Dame fourth. And Georgia fifth. The same. I think Cincinnati is in sixth. I think they were in sixth last week as well. They were seventh. Okay, so Cincinnati did bump up a spot. A&M there at 7. Florida jumping up a couple spots to 8. BYU in the top 10 for the first time in a while, and the first time 7-0, I think, since 2000 or 2001. Wisconsin there in the 10 hole after having to cancel their game this past weekend. We'll get into a little bit of that once we jump outside of the league later. Miami there in 11, Oregon in 12, Indiana in 13, Oklahoma State falling to Texas down at 14th there, Coastal Carolina, and Marshall keeping the undefeated streak going there at 15 and 16, Iowa State at 17, SMU at 18. Oklahoma keeps the winning alive and sitting at 19. USC still hadn't started the season yet, but they get started up this coming weekend, and they are in the 20 spot. Boise State moving up the ranks, 21. Texas back in the top 25 at 22nd. Michigan falls to 23rd after losing to Michigan State. Auburn back in the top 25, another SEC team there in the 24th spot. And look who's jumping up there in the top 25 at 25 in Liberty. 6-0, they come in there at that 25 spot. So kind of exciting there for, I'm sure, the coaches and the staff there at Liberty after getting to have an undefeated season like they've had going so far. But other than that, Cody, let's go ahead and jump right into some of our SEC games. Let's start it off at the 12 o'clock hour where Georgia and Kentucky faced off in an interesting game. I'm going to let you take it away, and I will give a little bit of input once we jump into it here in just a minute.
You said Georgia, Kentucky?
Yep.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I don't have times. Yeah, Georgia and Kentucky kicked off. To me, I think it was a sluggish start game. I think it was, 7-3 going to half?
Yeah, that's right.
Georgia gets the win there, 14-3 final. And like we mentioned earlier, Georgia, they have a lot of injuries in that game. I think you said 5 or 6 different injuries on defense, not including previous injuries and the count after the game. But nonetheless, Georgia did have a little bit of a struggle, I think, with Kentucky there for a little while. I know we talked a little bit during the game. Georgia's just, I don't know, dude. It just seems like they're just sluggish.
Yeah, the offense has been the question, I think, since the start of the season. And, you play Arkansas, that definitely makes you question, which Arkansas looks a lot better. I will give them credit for that as they've gone along throughout the season.
Oh, yeah.
But nonetheless, you jump into the Auburn game following that, the offense comes alive for the first half, goes back to sleep the second half. Then you come in against Tennessee, and it's kind of half-half through the first half, and then all of a sudden they put up 44 points by the end of that game against Tennessee and come alive, look great. First half against Bama still looked good, had the lead 24 putting up in the first half, but never scored again in the second half. And it's all about the offense. Like you said, previous coming into the game, they were missing a couple of guys offensively. Your key wide receiver who hadn't had many touches this season, but I was thinking this was going to be a game that he could get a lot. And George Pickens was out, didn't make the trip. Same with the running back, Kenny McIntosh, didn't make the trip. So you had a few guys down there on the offensive side. Same on defense. You had a couple of guys down too. And then, obviously, during the game, we lose a few guys as well. I think we're down like 7 guys by the end of this game. And even in the game, Richard LeCount was battling a little bit of, I think, a foot deal. And then, obviously, the motorcycle accident, that's going to take him out a while. So hopefully they can get a little bit figured out and a couple of these guys back before they had to play Florida at the end of the week. But like we said, I mean, Georgia did lean heavily on the offense on the run game when it comes to the offense. And Zamir White, he had a huge key game where he had a career rushing yards. I think like 138. I'll look back at it here in just a little bit. He had a key game as far as the running game goes. So Georgia did exactly what they saw Missouri was able to do, and that's just lean on that O-line, lean on that front seven of Kentucky that's a little bit banged up, and get your yards and your points that way. And they did it. Not many, though, because when it came to the air game, we weren't doing much. Stetson still threw over 100 yards, but not much coming from it. I was thinking we'd see JT maybe not start, but at least get in this game. And it makes me a little concerned for Georgia because I've heard a rumor that DeJuan Mathis, the backup quarterback, has deleted all of his information on Instagram. So it makes you wonder if he hadn't told Kirby, hey, I think I'm going to leave after this season, and Kirby's not going to put him back in there. And then that makes you also wonder, well, is JT really, really hurt? Or is he just not in a position to be able to give us anything better than what Stetson is, which is a really scary thing if that's the case, because Stetson is not giving you that much right now, and Georgia offense needs a boost. We need it from somewhere. We're getting it in the run game, it seems like, but I don't think you can be one-dimensional and try to run all over Florida. Granted, their defense isn't that great, but I think their defense can put a lot of people in the box on that front seven to at least stop or slow down the run game to make you have to throw the ball. And maybe we start to open the air game up. I don't know, but Georgia offensively has to figure it out and has to hope that on the defensive side of the ball, they get some of these guys back before they play Florida. On the other side of the ball, looking at Kentucky threw for 91 yards, I think. Not a lot through the air, and we knew that coming into it with Joey Gatewood getting his first start. There wasn't a lot to be expected as far as the air game came from Kentucky. They didn't look real good in the air against Missouri the week previous, and they didn't look good again here in the air against Georgia. They did the same thing. They were able to actually run on that strong Georgia defense. I think you said they ran for over 130 yards in the game, and Rodriguez by himself ran for like 108 yards, I believe you said. So at the end of the day, they do only get a field goal. So yeah, at the end of the day, they do only get a field goal. So Georgia's defense was able to stand and hold them enough. But again, offensively, I think the Dogs have a lot of work to do to be able to get to where they want to be, especially coming up this week having to take on number 8 Florida.
Yeah, like you mentioned with Georgia's passing game, Stetson Bennett only attempted 13 passes on the day and completed only 9 of them for 131 yards with 2 interceptions.
Yeah, 2 of which he did complete to the other team.
So technically he went 12 for 13.
Not too bad.
No, not at all. But, at the same time, when you're only throwing for 13 attempts, you can't win games doing that.
Yeah, not unless you're running for 300 yards.
And you're not even cracking 150 with Zeus.
Yeah.
He only had 20. Zamir White had 26 carries for 136 yards. And then Cook had 39 yards, Milton had 31, and Stetson had 9. Honestly, you can't win games doing that. Yes, you had 215 yards total rushing, but only with 131. Like we've heard coaches here in the past few weeks say, it used to be his defenses wins games. Well, we've done learned that you can't have a defense, but as long as your offense can put up numbers, you're good.
Yeah, I will say that as far as that goes, I do think defense can win you games because I do think that if Georgia plays almost anybody other than Arkansas, or not Arkansas, anybody other than Vandy this past week and plays the way that they do, they don't win the game without the defense holding them to what they were able to hold to. Because I think even Arkansas, no knock on Arkansas, they're a lot better this year, but I think if Georgia had played Arkansas like they did against Kentucky, I think Arkansas would have beat them. And that's where it comes down to, just like Nick said, does defense win championships? Yeah, it used to. But when it comes to a great defense versus a great offense, that offense now has become potent enough to be able to beat a great defense. Now, having a great defense is a good thing, but at the same time, you've got to have something to compete with it on the offensive side of the ball.
Yeah, if you don't have an offense to move the ball, then your defense is going to struggle.
Yeah.
We saw that against the Alabama-Georgia game. You know, that first half, Georgia's defense stayed out there a lot of that first half.
Yeah.
And come fourth quarter, it showed. You can see the defense was a little bit gassed, and you know that's the difference there. I think too with great offenses and defenses is if you have a great offense that can move a ball, they may not get a lot of big yardage, but they can get a little bit here and a little bit there and keep that ball moving. That wears a defense out. And we've seen it so many times in so many teams. The longer your defense is on the field, almost less likely you get a chance to win that game because your defense is going to be gassed come the fourth quarter.
Yeah.
I mean, Kentucky, no knock on Kentucky. Kentucky's a great team. You know, they're only 2-4 in the season, but they're doing better, I think, than both of us accounted for. Oh no, I actually have them doing better. Both, I have them going 6-4 on the year. You had them going.
You actually had them 2-8. I had them 6-4.
Yeah, 6-4. I have 2-8. So they're about in line where I had them. I think I'm actually doing pretty good with their picks so far. No, they didn't win when I was expecting. But anyways, besides that point, Georgia has a lot to kind of figure out, especially with all these injuries coming in. You got some younger players coming in, so you have to rely a lot on that recruiting class. And at the same time, you got to rely on the coaching. And nothing against Kirby, he's a great coach, but he's just not making, I don't want to say bad calls coaching, but at the same time that, there's some plays that some calls that you're like, look, dude, if you don't have a quarterback, then we need to know. Because it looks bad right now when you say Stetson Bennett's our best option.
Yeah.
When he's struggled last 2 games.
Yeah. Yeah, very true. Very true. Well, like we said, we'll jump into some of the stuff the upcoming and kind of see how Georgia looks to shake out through the rest of the week as far as injuries go, and see how Kentucky looks as they get prepared for the next weekend as well. But let's go ahead and roll into the game that surprised, I think, both of us, that LSU-Auburn game there on the Plains at Auburn. Take it away with that one, Cody, because that one shocked me for sure. Where's Auburn's offense been like this all season?
Apparently they've been sleeping. Like I mentioned earlier, I did talk to one of our guys that we get some of our information from, and he even mentioned that. I even asked him, I was like, dude, where has Auburn been all year? He's like, I guess they've been sleeping. But, I think this right here, this shows, I'm trying to think the best way. With Auburn football like it is right now, I think this is the best example, of what happens when you don't have spring and summer practice. Yeah. Auburn had a real slow start, slowly coming out of the gate, and LSU's missing some real big key players. on defense and offense at the same time. But at the same time, Auburn's coming in this game. They're at home. They're coming off a decent win last week. And then Bo Nix just pulls something out of his butt that we ain't seen all year. Throws for 300 yards with 3 touchdowns and a QBR of 92.8.
Where's that been?
Yeah, where was this at?
Yeah.
You struggle against South Carolina. You struggle against Arkansas. You struggle against Ole Miss. And here you are playing LSU, and we're all thinking this is going to be a close game. And here Auburn is throwing up 48 points on LSU.
Yeah. Like you were saying, Bo Nix, he also led the category in rushing for Auburn as well. 11 carries, 81 yards, and a touchdown. The other side of the ball that I was curious about, I didn't get to watch the entire game as far as the LSU-Auburn game goes. I was watching as many of them as I could, and about the time that LSU and Auburn really got going good, I actually had to leave because, it was Halloween. We had a little bit of a fall festival thing going on, so I had to take off for it. And I wasn't able to keep up with the entire game. But looking here, I see that the quarterback stat leader for LSU was not T.J. Finley. I know that Miles Brennan was still out this game. And I know that T.J. Finley was set to start, but I'm seeing Johnson ended up being who took over, Max Johnson, which is also a freshman out of Watkinsville, Georgia. But he does go 172 yards, 1 touchdown on the night. I was trying to see what his numbers were. He went 15 for 24, so not the greatest, but also not terrible. This is his only game that he played. Do you have any information as far as what happened with T.J. Finley going into this one?
From what I've watched a little bit of it. And it looked like Auburn just had TJ's number. He did go 13 for 24 on the night with 143 yards, but he threw 2 picks. And those 2 picks, I know one was turned back for a touchdown. I want to say the other one was 2. Or was it just 1?
I don't know. I can look right here and see.
No, neither one was returned back.
They had total of 3. Nope.
There's 2 interceptions and a fumble.
Yeah.
No, 2 fumbles and 2 receptions.
Yeah, one pick six. Yeah, like you say.
So there was a pick 6.
Well, it says when I look at the miscellaneous was Tut had a touchdown on defense, but when I look at the interceptions, was that the scoop and score?
Yeah, that was a scoop and score.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, well, that was the other one. Pritchett, he had the pick for 48 yards, but it wasn't. I think he was tackled on like 3. Wasn't that the big guy?
Yeah. So,
yeah.
Auburn, I don't know. They just pulled this out of thin air. Gus Malzahn once again gets a wish granted from the football fairies. I guess you can put it, just because. Here we are looking at Auburn. Had a struggle year to start off with. They got the win against Kentucky. They got they beat Kentucky, lost to Georgia.
Controversy over Arkansas. Controversy over Ole Miss.
They lost Kentucky and Georgia, then won Arkansas, South Carolina, Ole Miss, and LSU.
Oh, I thought they beat Kentucky to start the season. You sure about that? Yeah, they beat Kentucky, lost to Georgia, beat Arkansas, beat Ole Miss, beat LSU. So they're 4 and. Well, they should have another loss.
That's what I'm saying. So they should have lost to.
I'm missing a game, but it's not Kentucky. They opened the season.
South Carolina.
South Carolina. That was it. That was the first loss. Yeah.
They lost South Carolina. Okay.
Yeah. It's kind of hard to overlook South Carolina, ain't it?
Yeah, I know. We'll get to them in a minute. But anyways, like we mentioned, Auburn just kind of surprised, I think, everybody, even themselves, coming out with this game.
Yeah, kind of looking at a thing I was looking at here, going through the score of it. Nobody scores in the first quarter, so going in the second quarter, it's obviously tied up at 0. And then with just kind of getting into the second quarter, Auburn does get a touchdown. And then not long after that, just before half, about 5.5 minutes before the half, that's when the scoop and score comes. So it would have still been 7-0 a little bit later, but the scoop and score comes. That puts them up 14-0. And then with just under a minute left, Auburn scores again to make it 21-0. And at the buzzer, LSU gets a field goal to make it 21-3. And then Auburn just never looked back. They score a few more times in the third quarter, score once there on a huge pass from Bo Nix, 91-yard touchdown pass to Anthony Schwartz getting into the fourth quarter as they basically just got started, making it 48-3 before not long after that LSU scores on a Max Johnson touchdown pass, 43-yarder to make it 48-11 after they go for two. Kind of strange seeing them go for two, but nonetheless, I mean, it doesn't really matter to me. But yeah, Auburn's offense there in that second and third quarter just came alive and just took off, something I think, like you said, neither of us were really expecting.
Yeah, I think everybody was expecting that game to be a little closer than we initially thought, or than it initially turned out.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I'm glad to see Auburn finally start firing all cylinders, especially here in a couple of weeks. You do have the real big game here in the state in the Iron Bowl. Because if it's a one-sided game, we've seen those games before, they're not fun to watch.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's good to see Auburn finally learn how to play football this year. And hopefully they can continue that trend. If not, I don't know. I give up trying to figure the season out because if it goes downhill next week,
yeah, I mean, what can you expect?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. You can never tell this year.
Yeah. Well, I tell you what, let's plow forward and let's jump into what we were talking about earlier in that Lane Kiffin team, unless you had something else on Auburn real quick.
No, I was about to jump on down to Ole Miss anyways.
Yeah. So, yeah, and starting that Ole Miss game, Ole Miss continues the offensive strike, getting a big win, 54-21 over Vandy. Poor Vandy. No wins on the season. I don't see one in the books or on the screen to be able to come across. I will give it to old Seals, though, in the quarterback position. He goes 31 for 40, 319 yards, 2 touchdowns, does have an interception on the night. He actually didn't look too bad. I mean, to put up 319 yards tells you how bad Ole Miss's defense is. But, again, that offense just with Matt Corral, when he doesn't make mistakes throwing the ball, you know, they can put up a heat load of yards. I mean, 31 for 34, 412 yards, 6 touchdowns. My goodness. What a stat line right there for a quarterback. Granted, it's Vandy's defense.
I mean, that's the thing that I initially was thinking about. We'll get to it when we get done with all this about our Crimson Dog of the Week. I mean, looking at your stats, I also try to look at who they're playing. Look at the defense that they're facing. And, you know, Matt Corral going 31 for 34, 412 yards and 6 touchdowns, like you mentioned, is great and not taken away from him. But once again, you're playing Vandy.
Yeah.
Nothing against Vandy, but you're Vandy. I mean, you're 0-4 on the year, and I think your closest game, I'm trying to pull it up real quick.
Probably the Alabama game.
Was actually Texas A&M.
Oh, really?
If I remember correctly. Let me see. Here, let me pull it up.
While he's looking at that, Henry Brooks does lead the rushing category there for Vandy. 23 carries, 66 yards, and a touchdown. The receiving side of things was Johnson there from Seals. 14 receptions, 97 yards. Elijah Moore was the leading receiver there for Ole Miss. 14 receptions, 238 yards, 3 touchdowns. Have yourself a night. Darion Ely was also the rushing leader there for Ole Miss. 15 carries, 95 yards, no touchdowns on the ground for him. But nonetheless, what a great game as far as through the air and that air raid there for Ole Miss in this one. Did you find the stat or the number you're looking for?
Yeah, Vandy's best game was against A&M. They don't play Alabama this year.
Oh, okay. I thought you were talking about Ole Miss. What their closest game was. I got you. Yeah, that was surprising starting the season. We thought Vandy may have had something there, and then
a 5-point
not so much.
loss to Texas A&M. Then next thing you know, they got blown out by LSU 41-7, blown out by South Carolina 41-7, and then blown out by Ole Miss 54-21.
Yeah.
At least they did score more than one touchdown.
They did. Maybe the only time they scored this many, but.
Well, they got Missouri. Missouri's postponed. They still got Mississippi State. to play also.
Yeah, that's true.
So that one should be. They should have.
That one could turn around and be a good game.
It may be. But, yeah, I mean, A&M keeps on. Ole Miss keeps on keeping on. Lane Kiffin there. Once again, their defense is lackluster, I guess you can say.
Yeah.
But the offense, once again, is outstanding to watch. Puts on another great show. And Ole Miss's next game is actually against South Carolina, so that should be a fun one to watch.
Yeah, that one might not be too bad on one to watch. Coming up there. Well, let's go to another one in the state of Mississippi anyway, and the team that just, my goodness, I thought they would at least put a field goal up, but didn't put up anything against the Crimson Tide of Alabama. I'm gonna let you take it away with that one.
Yeah, this game, I think it kind of went like most of us were thinking. I don't think we're thinking it's gonna be this bad. First quarter was kind of. Let's see if I think first quarter was kind of lackluster. I get to pull back up real quick. Computer being a little retarded.
That definitely happens.
Yeah, Alabama puts up 17 points in the first quarter, and I think it's safe to say now, and you may agree with me, I think Alabama has a kicker.
Yeah, between seeing Alabama actually kick a field goal and also seeing a referee do a review in an Auburn game, I'm fairly certain that there was some bad juju going around on Halloween for things like that to be happening, and I just couldn't do anything but sit back and go, what is going on in the SEC this weekend?
But if I remember correctly, and I think I am, Will Reinhardt, I think I said that right, is perfect on the year, 6 for 6 for field goals.
Oh man, I hate it for him because since you said that, you've now jinxed him, and he's definitely gonna boink one this coming up. Well, you'll get a bye week this week, but the following week he's gonna boink one off the side. My goodness, that is unreal. I guess Nick finally decided after a couple of years. All right, I'm tired of having a guy go out there, which at the end of the day, it may not matter. He may never need him to kick a field goal in a game this season unless they go to play a Clemson or an Ohio State in the playoffs.
Well, we knew he could hit a 50-yarder because he surprised all of us when he hit that one.
Oh, I know. When he kicked it, I was like, well, this is just meant for this one to go down in the books right here.
And all the seconds up, we're going to have a repeat from all 1 second left on the clock, too. Seriously, another freaking...
I did kind of have that thought. Well, looking at some of the Mississippi State lines on this, I was really surprised. KJ Costello goes 4 for 11. Again, this wasn't one I watched just because I'm just going to be honest with you. I will watch Alabama, but after you put up 30-something points and the other team ain't got a single point, and I see the same thing where you're just busting guys over the top with Devontae Smith, with obviously don't have Jaylen Waddle. But with you big guys there, Mitchie, I was just like, I mean, what's the point in even watching? You just, I to an extent, it's fun to watch for a little while, but then I just get to the point where I'm like, man, it's boring just watching them wear somebody out. And I think you could even say the same thing. But looking on the other side of the ball, I wasn't sure if KJ Costello got hurt or if going 4 for 11 for 16 yards was enough to say, all right, we got to make a change and put Will Rogers in there, who does go 24 for 37, 147 yards with 2 interceptions on the night. So that not Lane Kiffin, but the Mike Leach air raid was not happening. The ground game was not either. They only rushed it 15 times for 37 yards. Absolutely nothing moving. And since that Georgia game has come along, since the first half of the Georgia game, Alabama's defense has showed up and showed out and has not let points be put on the board, with the exception, I guess, to last week. They gave up a couple, but for the most part, I mean, Alabama has just, the defense has showed up. They said that there wasn't one against Ole Miss, and sure enough, there wasn't. But my goodness, since then, that's all Alabama's done is outside of put up 100 points, they've also stopped anybody from scoring.
Yeah, I mean, it's good to see Alabama's defense also scoring. Also, yeah, Patrick Surtain got an interception for 25 yards. That was a touchdown, and Dylan Moses also had a interception that. Why zone, I won't know. He should have.
He probably got excited.
I don't know. I mean, he interception in his own drop, dude. Brings it out to the 20. But he tried to run it out. I guess he saw something that he thought he could possibly do. But then again, it could have just been adrenaline.
Yeah.
But I mean, at the same time, no, I meant to pull this up earlier. I was gonna say something. Let's see. Yeah. As far as the matchup went, Mississippi State only had 12 first downs, Alabama 26. Third down efficiency, Mississippi State was 2 for 15, Alabama 6 for 14. Fourth down, Mississippi State perfect on the night, 2 for 2, and 0 for 2 for Alabama. The total yards, though, is the difference in this game. Mississippi State just barely cracking 200 yards, where Alabama's knocking on the 500-yard mark at 499 yards. And that was a pretty much split as far as that goes, where 291 of that for Alabama was through the air, and 208 of that was on the ground. Defensive-wide, Alabama only gave up 163 through the air, and only 37 on the ground. So our run defense has showed up. It's good to see them finally get into gear, especially with the end of the season coming up. Hopefully they can continue that streak to looking towards playoffs. But besides that, I mean, I think they pretty much covered that game. They didn't really a whole lot to talk about that game.
I mean, it was just a good old-fashioned whooping.
Yeah, Mississippi State, I think that's 14 years in a row now.
Yeah.
That they have yet to beat Alabama.
Yeah, I knew y'all had a. I keep saying y'all. Excuse me. I knew Alabama had a streak going because I knew Georgia was 10 years against Kentucky, and that Alabama. Okay, so that was it. So y'all continue a streak, and I feel like there was one other that there was a streak going in the SEC. I'd have to look back at it to see what it was. Now let's go ahead and jump back into our next game, which is the Arkansas A&M game. Both of us expected it to be somewhat close. I know the past few years it has been close, and for the most part, it was a pretty close game. Going into the second half, A&M was up 28-14, and for the most part, through that third quarter, they continued to put it on them. And going into the fourth quarter, it was 42-17, A&M all the way, and that's when there for a little while we're really there at the beginning. Arkansas, started to try to make a comeback, made it 24-42, and then really late in the game, under a minute to play, they made it 31-42. But for a little while, I was hoping Arkansas was going to make it a little bit closer. Felipe Franks actually looked a lot better in this game than I anticipated. He goes 23 for 31, 239 yards with 3 touchdowns. On the other side of that, Kellen Mond goes 21 for 26, 260 with 3 touchdowns for himself. Raheem Boyd ran it really well for 100 yards, a touchdown on 18 carries. And then Isaiah Spiller also on the A&M side, he ran it 21 times, 82 yards for a touchdown as well. So it was kind of, even though it wasn't a lopsided game, it was much closer. It was a good game. Arkansas well fought. Arkansas looks a lot better this season, especially to be going against a top team. I mean, they ran Georgia to the wire for the most part. They had Auburn beat, who's now in the top 25. They had Ole Miss beat, who's not in the top 25 but has a really potent offense. And then you look at A&M. They didn't have them beat in this one. A&M proves that there's a reason they're in the top 25. But nonetheless, Arkansas still looks a lot better this year. And I was, I've never been a really big fan of Felipe Franks, but I will say he had a much, much better game this week going into it. Through the air, they throw 239 yards, and then on the ground, Arkansas alone goes 222. So they're putting up the same kind of offensive numbers as Alabama did in this game, but they didn't have enough defense to be able to stop A&M. And that was one thing I harped on before this game was I thought Arkansas's defense would look a lot better. Unfortunately, A&M's offense was enough of a powerhouse and has come alive within the past few weeks, and they were able to power past that defense. Kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier. Sometimes a really great offense is enough to be able to push back against a really good defense.
Oh, yeah. I mean, like you mentioned, the difference in this game was A&M's defense making those stops when they needed to most. They did give up 14 out there before the end of the game, but I think at that point, they're comfortable enough thinking, we got a good enough lead, we're good, we'll let it ride. And then Arkansas says, we can do something maybe, but just wasn't enough time left on the clock for them to make that game a little bit closer than what it is. A&M does get the win over Arkansas 42-31. At the same time, like you mentioned, Kelly Mond going for 260 yards. Felipe Franks going for 239 yards. Both quarterbacks are doing really good this year. I think they're doing about what we thought they would do, putting up some really good numbers. They're just not getting help on that defensive side of the ball. But you got to do what you got to do, man.
Yeah, no, for sure. Good for A&M because they get to continue to roll, and that'll be a question and something to keep an eye on there with A&M being in that second spot in the West there. Can they keep it rolling, and can they put up a fight? Could they be the team with the one loss at the end of the season to be able to put them up for contention? Because if you look at it right now, if Georgia was to beat Florida this upcoming weekend, well, look at there. Florida has one loss, or will then have two losses, where Georgia only has the one. If they can continue to win for the rest of the season, well, then look, and at the backside of that, you got an A&M one loss that has only lost to Alabama. And if the argument would be, do they get in over a Florida team? Well, they beat Florida, so obviously that would put them over. So that's going to be something to watch. Keep an eye on these Aggies of A&M and see if they can continue to win where they sit at the end of the season. Because I think right now, looking at the rest of their schedule, they should have a pretty breezy rest of the schedule to be able to get on through. Looking at it here, let's see. Tennessee, I don't think it's going to give them much of a fight. LSU doesn't look all that great this year. They should be able to take care of them. Maybe at the end of the season when they play Auburn, that could be a good fight, and that should be a really good end of the season to play Auburn there. So that's really the only game I see that they could struggle with there at the end of the season. Outside of that, keep an eye on A&M because they look really good this year.
I will say, too, one team I wouldn't overlook them just because you don't never know how they're going to come out and play is that South Carolina team. I think they kind of spot us this year, too, so I think between South Carolina, Ole Miss, and Auburn, that's the three best teams right now to beat A&M towards the end of the year.
Yeah. Let's go ahead and move on into that Missouri-Florida game real quick. I'll let you start us off with that one.
Oh, I thought we already covered. No, we just covered the fight in that game.
Yeah, that's it. Which is almost half of it.
That was pretty much of it. But yeah, in that game, Florida does get the victory over Missouri, even after the backyard brawl, 41-17 there. Kyle Trask goes 21 for 36, 345 yards, 4 touchdowns, and 1 interception on the night. Let's see. Looks like the leading for Missouri was, what's his? Connor
Bazelak.
Went 26 for 40 with 208 yards, no touchdowns, 4 interceptions, but at the same time, you gotta have some points on the board, man.
Yeah.
I think all there. Let's see, they had a defensive touchdown. Yeah, defensive touchdown and then a running touchdown. The only 2 actual touchdowns they had, plus the field goal.
Yeah.
So Missouri came to play a little bit, but you down in the swamp and in that atmosphere, I don't care if it's not even a full house. It's tough to play Florida in the swamp.
Yeah, for sure. Like you say, going into that second quarter, it's only 6-0 Florida after a couple of field goals. And then without that pick six that happens right there near in the beginning of that second quarter to make it 7-6 a Missouri lead, this game is a lot further off. You're talking about a 41-10 game, which still isn't much of a difference, but it is. And then Florida goes on with 1:41 to go. They get a touchdown pass, turn right back around basically 30 seconds later, and they do it again to put them up 20-7, and they never look back. Not until the fourth quarter when Missouri started to put some more points back up. But the biggest thing on this is Kyle Trask. Kyle Trask looks so good this season coming in. When I looked at a number that I was looking at earlier, which was kind of surprising to me, he is the only quarterback in SEC history who has thrown more touchdowns through 4 games, and that being at 18 touchdown passes through 4 games. So he's setting records there in the SEC with that, and continues to look really, really good, and just continues to give defenses trouble there on that side of the ball. I mean, his key guy still continues to be Kyle Pitts as well, but he's also getting that ball out to Kadarius Toney as well, and they're making things happen there on the offense. So Florida's offense continues to roll. Their defense stood up a little bit better in this Missouri game. Like you said, Connor Bazelak, 208 yards. Didn't look all that great. Kyle Trask did throw 1 pick on the night. That was that pick 6 to start it, but take that away and he still looks good. He actually did end up being the rushing leader, 6 carries, 47 yards. So they didn't put much on the ground. Most everything was coming through the air. Kyle Pitts was, again, the leading receiver, 81 yards. But, I mean, Florida just looks good. They continue to look good. They're going to give Georgia a lot of trouble this upcoming weekend, so that's going to be the game to watch for me. But Missouri, the defense seems to look good at times, but again, we've said it twice already. I'm going to say it a third time and try not to say it again. The defense compared to the offense is the thing in the SEC this year. The SEC's all of a sudden come out, and we've got Big 12 offenses. And Georgia's one of the only teams to actually have a pretty good defense in the SEC this year. But what the SEC lacks is an SEC defense, which we've been so used to and accustomed to seeing year in and year out. It's very strange not to see that this year in the SEC. But you see these powerhouse offenses continue to roll everywhere.
Yeah, you see some high-scoring games this year. I don't think we were prepared to see for.
No, I never expected it.
I think this year, the offense is the highest scoring offensive year for the SEC in several years. But if you're all right with it, I'm gonna go over some stats real quick. I pulled up.
Yeah, no problem. Are you going through this Missouri or Florida game, or are you going through some others real quick?
No, this is for the total SEC.
All right, let me hit you. Let's round out this Missouri-Florida real quick. I'm gonna run through some stats on it. Total yards, Missouri only puts up 248, so Florida is able to keep them under 250, whereas Florida turns around and puts up 514, 345 of which were through the air, 208 were through the air for Missouri. On the ground, Florida only gave up 40 rushing yards in this, so this rush defense was able to stand up for the Gators, even though they only ran for 169 yards on the night. Few penalties for each team, put up a lot of yardage. Obviously, the scuffle there at halftime, which really seemed to fire up that Gators offense and get them rolling in the second time. Both teams turned it over twice. The time of possession was fairly close there for both teams. Missouri with 27 minutes on the dot. How about that? Florida, 33 minutes on the dot. No seconds play into it. But nonetheless, Florida definitely continued to roll with the offense. We'll see how they look this upcoming weekend against Georgia and see if Georgia can't turn things around. But go ahead and hit me with some of those stats that you were going to hit me with there for the SEC before we start to jump into some of our other stuff, because we're starting to actually get a little bit strained on time here looking at it.
Yeah, I'll roll these real quick. This right here is the 2020 statistics for the year. This is the top 5 players for your passing yards, your rushing yards, receiving yards, sacks, and interceptions and tackles. And there's some familiar names in these lists. So, starting off, passing yards, your leader, this so far in the season for passing yards is a Alabama quarterback there in Matt Jones, leading with 2,196 yards. Matt Corral right behind him with 1,846 yards. Bo Nix following up behind him with 1,407. Florida quarterback there, Kyle Trask with 1,341. And KJ Costello finishing off that top 5 with 1,283.
Yeah, those are some pretty good numbers. I'll tell you a funny number that I saw earlier that kind of blew me away. It was when I went to look to see what the Florida Georgia game this upcoming weekend, what the line was set, and they've actually got Georgia as a 4.5-point favorite is what it opened up as here on Sunday. Again, as I say every time, but for you new listeners, if you're listening to this, you're listening to it on Monday, but we do record this on Sunday. And this is the line. It blows my mind. Kyle Trask is the SEC history maker as far as the only SEC quarterback to throw for 18 touchdowns through the first 4 games of the season. Obviously, one of the games that they had ended up being postponed, so he could have one other game under his belt. They do have one less game than Georgia, but look at this number. He's thrown for 18 touchdowns, only throwing for 1,341 yards so far on the season. Turn around and look at the other side of the ball. Stetson Bennett, he's thrown for 1,089 yards, only 7 touchdowns. More than that. He's thrown for less than half of what Kyle Trask has thrown, if that number makes sense there. More interceptions, obviously, but he's only like 200 and some odd yards, maybe 240 yards off of being where Kyle Trask is. If you take one more game for Georgia, he could be a lot closer. Obviously, if you give Florida one more game, Kyle Trask probably blows that away by another 200 yards at least. But I was kind of surprised to see that Kyle Trask had set that record there, having that many touchdowns through 4 games, but not having quite as many yards as I anticipated. Because, if you see something like that where he's set an SEC record to be the only quarterback in history to be able to throw for 18 touchdowns in 4 games, you think, oh, he's got to be the career stat leader as far as it comes to yardage, but he's not. Mac Jones is at the top, hadn't thrown for quite as many, but he's right there on his tail. That kind of blew my mind to see that number as close as it is to Stetson Bennett, who's been struggling thus far on the Georgia offense. Just a funny number, like you were saying, pulling up some of the stats there. I had seen that one earlier, and I was like, hey, I gotta catch this one up, and you gave me the perfect opportunity there.
Well, since we're talking about receiving yards or quarterback yards there, we'll go to receiver yards real quick. The lead receiving yardage, or lead receiver in yards is Ole Miss receiver Elijah Moore with 829. Now, here's the difference in the numbers right here for your quarterback. 3 of your top 5 are Alabama quarterbacks or receivers. And numbers in second place for the SEC right now is Devontae Smith with 759. Behind him, you have Jalen Waddle, who is out for the year, with 557. Terrence Marshall Jr., LSU wide receiver, 540. And then John Mechie III, Alabama receiver, there with 517. So 3 of your top 5 receivers there are from Alabama are having over 500 yards. So I think that's your difference there. Where is in Florida, let's pull this up real quick. Kyle Trask pretty much only has one big target in Kyle Pitts, and he only has 355 yards on the year.
Yeah, that's a pretty good number there. I'll tell you what, to kind of keep us a little bit, or keep us on track here and running through some of the time here, because we're getting a little bit strict on time. Let me take just a quick break for us real quick. All right, guys, we are back with it here. We're going to jump in and go ahead and put up on the screen for you guys that are watching visually. We're going to do our Crimson Dog of the day. Boom, got it up here on the screen for you guys. And Cody, I'll let you go ahead and announce at least your Crimson Dog of the day. I've actually got another one for us that I'm going to put up after you give ours, or give yours, excuse me.
Yeah, I was actually toss up between 3 of them. But I went up with this one just because of the performance that they put up all together as a team. But with him leading the team, I'm going with Bo Nix with Auburn Tigers. With that stellar performance he had against LSU. Like I mentioned earlier, he went 18 for 24 with 300 yards, 3 touchdowns, 11 carries for 81 yards, and a running touchdown also. So he's finally showing up and playing some football there at Auburn University. So that's my Crimson Dog for the week.
Yeah, I can definitely agree with that. And like you said, there were a few different ones that we could have went with. Matt Corral, he also looked really good. Mac Jones obviously looks good every week. Even Najee Harris still put up another 100-yard rushing game. But for me, I'm going to stick with the guy that I've actually going with the guns on this year, which can come as a surprise from some people. But I've got to give it to Florida's Kyle Trask there at quarterback. A couple of quarterbacks here. Goes 21 for 36 in the night, like we spoke about earlier. 345 yards, 9.6 is his average. 4 total touchdowns, all through the air. Did throw 1 interception on the night. Ends at an 83.2 QBR. Did run the ball 6 times, 47 yards, and 26 was his long. So no touchdowns on the ground. but 4 total touchdowns for both of these Crimson Dogs that we've got put up here for the week. They're Bo Nix out of Auburn and Kyle Trask there out of Florida. So congratulations to both of those guys on being named the Crimson Dog of the week. We'll see what it looks like come next week once we get prepped up for this same little segment here. We're going to jump into now. Again, we're crunching on time, getting a little deep into it. Don't want this to be too long for you guys. I'm going to pull up our picks from this past week. That is not our picks, but this is. Boom. Get it up on the screen for you guys here. Here you go. Cody, you're ending off the week. You will now be 12-6 overall. I will be 14-6. We were exactly the same on every pick. There was no difference, so our rankings would have been no different. As far as the scores go, was really the only difference. I'm going to start it here at the top. You had Georgia and Kentucky. You had that one picked at 42-10. Georgia does get the win 14-3. So that's a win for you.
Close.
Yeah, not too bad. Maybe if you turn the 14 around, it makes it a lot closer and would have been a lot nicer there. And then on the other side of it, I had Georgia at 38-17. So both of us thought Georgia would put up a little bit more of an offensive deal, and thought Kentucky might put up a little bit more too. But not so much. But either way, we do get a win. Both of us do fall in the LSU-Auburn. You had LSU pick 35-28 over Auburn. I had them pick 41-27. Obviously, Auburn didn't upset them, but they just put it on them 48-11. So both of us get the loss there. Moving on, you got Ole Miss and Vandy. You had them pick 56-14. They do win 54-21. So you were really, really close on that one. I had that one picked 54-10. Had Ole Miss's score pick, but not quite on Vandy's. Didn't think they'd put up that much, but they did. Both of us had a pretty close, and I think you were actually the closest on this one. For the Bama-Mississippi State game, you had Bama 42-14. It does end 41-0, so pretty close there for you. And on the other side of it, I had it 44-14. So both of us stayed pretty close. And it's fun that both of us are putting up these predictions, not going off of what anybody else is saying or any other analyst or anything. This is just right off the top of our head what we think they're going to end up doing. And for the most part, we're right there in the ballpark of what it looks like, with the exception to the Georgia game after no offense and the LSU-Auburn game being completely flipped. But let's move on with it. Arkansas and A&M. You picked them 28-10. They do win 42-31. Not quite as close on that one for either of us, really. I had it picked 27-24. There was a little bit more offense for both teams that were put up. But nonetheless, we did have it close games at least, and it did end up being pretty close. And then the final on the other was the Florida-Mizzou. You had Florida picked 56-17. You did get Mizzou's score there, with Florida putting up a few more after that one ends, 41-17. I had that one picked 31-24. So some good picks. Again, we are now 14-6, me 12-6, you. We'll continue to pick through it, and I think what I might have to do next time is I might have to look at your picks beforehand and try to alter mine a little bit, so that way maybe, just maybe, we can have a little bit of difference instead of everything basically staying exactly the same. Looking at MadDawgs' pick from the weekend, he did get a win, but he also got a loss. He took Auburn as well with us in this one, and unfortunately Auburn loses. He did get the win picking Georgia over Kentucky, so he moves to 3-6 on the year. Not the greatest.
Auburn won. He said Auburn loses. Auburn won against LSU, buddy.
Oh, you are right. You are right. I get to fix it for him. He's gonna be happy about this. I wonder what. I guess in my mind I was just like, yeah, they probably lost, so I just gave him the loss. I'm gonna go ahead and update this right here, because he deserves to have the right stuff up there instead of me completely botching it there. So I'm gonna go in, boot. I'm gonna hit this, and I'm gonna hit one more, because guess what? He is now 4-5 on the year. That actually makes it look a lot better than what it was and what I had it. Sorry about that. Boom. There we go. Updating it on the screen for you guys. Thank you for catching me on that, because otherwise he would have sat at the same. He would have sat at the same record. I didn't even pick it up when I was going through it earlier. So good call by you on that. I'm glad that you caught it. I do not have the visual for you guys as far as the East and West rankings. I was trying to get it pulled up earlier and I couldn't get it pulled up. I will pull up the bet lines for you guys and we can go through them real quick. Excuse me. Let me pop this off real quick so I can undo this. Had one little switcheroo on there. Boom, there we go. All right, your bet lines from the weekend. Georgia was a 17-point favorite. Obviously, that did not happen. LSU was a 2.5-point favorite. That didn't happen either. Ole Miss was a 16.5-point favorite. I think Ole Miss did actually cover that 16.5. Yeah, Mississippi State and Bama. Bama was a 31-point favorite. Well, guess what? They won by 41, so they covered that. A&M was a 12-point favorite over Arkansas. They did cover that one as well. Florida, 12.5-point favorite over Mizzou, and they covered that as well. For the most part, most of you guys are getting everything covered. Again, I did not have the ability to be able to get our visual updated for the East and West rankings, but I'm going to run through them for you real quick anyway, so that way you guys will know where you stand. I don't know that too much changes. I'll look at it on the screen here. Georgia's still at the top. Florida follows them up there. Tennessee's actually in third now over Missouri. Then you got Missouri behind them. South Carolina following that. Kentucky next to last. And Vandy's still rounding out your bottom. That's what it looks like on the East. So a little bit of change up there in the middle of the pack. Looking at the West real quick. Alabama still at the top with A&M following right behind. Auburn there in third. LSU will actually bump up above Arkansas now. And it rounds out Ole Miss, Mississippi State. So a little bit changing there at the end, whereas LSU's going to jump. Arkansas, Mississippi State will fall below Ole Miss. So just a couple of changes there on your West. And that's pretty much going to round out most of the stuff around the SEC. So we will jump into some of the games outside the league, and we're going to try to keep this, for the most part, again, we're working on trying to keep this as much SEC as we can possibly keep it. So in order to do that, we will mainly just go through some of the bigger games around the top 25. And I don't think you can start with too much bigger than that Boston College Clemson game. Can you, Cody?
Yeah, that was as most people who watch Jermaine Johnson on Facebook, that was a struggle win for Clemson. I mean, we knew Trevor Lawrence was, we found out Trevor Lawrence was going to be at that game, I think, a couple days prior to. So, I don't think we expect Boston College to give Clemson that much of a run, but Clemson escapes out 34-28 after being down 14 at the half. Or 14 at the half or more?
I think it was 13.
13 at the half, that's it. But yeah, Boston College showing that you can't play with Clemson, so it's going to be interesting to see how that game goes next week for Clemson as they get Notre Dame next week. Jumping on down, Ohio State takes care of business at Penn State. Gets the win there, 38-25. I know they're talking about Penn State. You know, traditionally with that game they do a whiteout. Due to coronavirus, they couldn't do it. I don't think they had many stands or fans in the stands. But nonetheless, Ohio State does get the win there, 38-25. Jumping on down, Notre Dame gets the win over Georgia Tech, 31-13. Upset in overtime, Texas gets a win over number 6 Oklahoma State, 41-34. The Big 12, dude, I don't even know what's going on with Big 12 this year. I don't think they know what's going on.
I kind of feel bad for Oklahoma State because I was really looking for them to just kind of roll on and roll away with it in the Big 12, and then you have Texas come in here and throw just a wrench in it like Texas would or Oklahoma would. But you did have a couple other upsets throughout the way as well.
Yeah, jumping on down, number 7 Cincinnati takes care of business against Memphis, getting the win there 49-10. BYU getting the win over Western Kentucky 41-10. Another upset in Michigan State over Michigan, number 13 Michigan. Michigan State gets a win by a field goal, 27-24. I actually saw a stat in this game. If I remember correctly, the head coach from Michigan State is his first year. He's only the second coach in Michigan State history to beat Michigan in his first year.
Yeah, that's came from Colorado State. Before that, he was at Georgia. He was a coordinator at Georgia, and I'm blanking on his name. But yeah, I think Michigan. I also saw a stat which I'm absolutely going to butcher, but I think Michigan's like 1-7 at home against their rivals in like Michigan State and Ohio State, which is pretty bad.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, well, let's continue rolling with it here.
that coach's name.
It'll come to me in a minute.
Yeah, anyways, Michigan State gets a win over Michigan. Another upset in Virginia, beating number 15 North Carolina. Virginia getting the win there, 44-41. Another upset falling behind that one, West Virginia. So both Virginia teams getting a win, big win here. West Virginia taking care of number 16 Kansas State, getting the win there, 37-10. So Kansas State falls. Number 17 Indiana gets a win over Rutgers, 37-21. Number 20 Coastal Carolina gets a huge win over Georgia State, 51-0. Coastal Carolina is rolling, dude. I wouldn't be surprised to say that's the team to kind of watch out for. We know they're not in a big Power 5 conference, but they're sneaking around there in the bottom, so keep an eye on them. Continue on down, number 22 SMU gets a huge win over Navy, 51-37. Iowa State takes care of Kansas, 52-22. Oklahoma takes care of Texas Tech, 62-28. And number 25 Boise gets a win over Air Force, 49-30. Like we mentioned earlier, number 9 Wisconsin and Nebraska is canceled due to a coronavirus outbreak at Wisconsin. And number 19 Marshall against Florida National was also postponed. And that was also due to coronavirus as well.
Yeah, so a couple of things just updating on what we were just talking about. Mel Tucker was the coach's name that used to be at Georgia, went to Colorado State, and is now there at Michigan State. The other side of that I was talking about that we would talk about later, and that later is the Wisconsin deal. Again, we are SEC. This is Big Ten related, but Wisconsin's got some issues. Their number, I think, jumped all the way up to like 22 at one point last week. And the Big Ten law is like 21 days those players have to be out. And if they are below that threshold, that means that for 3 weeks they won't be playing and they won't be able to reschedule those games because they started later and the way that their season lines up, they're not going to be able to make up some of these games. That's why it's canceled, not postponed, which is a really, really big issue around the Big Ten, because if they can't make these games up and they're only going to end up having like a 6 or 7 game schedule by the end of it, maybe even less than that, it's going to be very, very difficult for the committee to be able to look and say, okay, these teams haven't played as much, and a couple of the games that they were set to play were big games. For them not to have those games on the schedule, that could be a big deal and a deal breaker there for Wisconsin, who was looking to have a really good season after starting it off strong last week. So that'll be a thing to keep an eye on, especially there with the quarterback and Graham Mertz, who had a great start to start the season, and then everything just went downhill with Corona following that. Pull my notes back up here for us. Yeah, that's the round of the league. Do you have anything on your Raging Cajuns that I know that you're probably interested in catching us up on? You mean to tell me you don't have it pulled up in front of you?
I did, then I lost it. Yeah, they actually won. They beat Texas State, and they got knocked out of the top 25 again. But Louisiana, here comes the Raging Cajuns. Gets the win over Texas State 44-34. Continuing on to a 5-1 on the year. How can you not like them, dude? Honestly. They put up good numbers, and I think their only win this year, only loss this year, was to Coastal Carolina, and by a field goal. So, I like them. I like old Louisiana Raging Cajuns.
Yeah, there you go. Well, I'll tell you what, let's go ahead and jump into our Under the Lights segment real quick, and we'll get it started and go through some of the games around our local high school here. Cody, I'll let you start off over in the state of Alabama, and then we'll jump into some of the ones around the state of Georgia once you get finished with those.
Yeah, jump through real quick. Starting at Class 7A, Enterprise taking on Nirvana High School. Enterprise does not get the victory there. Nirvana gets the win 42-28. Enterprise falls to 7-3 on the season. Continue on down. Let's find their stat. Well, match press all over the place. Okay. So we'll just come back to that later. Anyways, Dothan taking on McGill Tulane. I'm guessing that's how you pronounce that. Anyways, Dothan does not get a victory there. They fall there 35-7. Andalusia taking on Brant. Andalusia getting the win there 41-19. Carroll was looking to play Tallahassee. That game again was forfeited due to, I think, a coronavirus outbreak at Carroll. So Tallahassee gets the win by forfeit. Jumping on down to Class 3A, Ashford gets the win over Northside Methodist, 46-27. Our alumni Houston County goes down to take on host Cottonwood Bears at home. That game apparently was a really good game. Cottonwood Bears ended up getting the win there, 44-40. Let's see, jumping on down, Geneva County taking on Slocum. Slocum getting the win there, 20-13. Rehoboth Rebels taking on Wicksburg Panthers. Rehoboth getting the win there, 28-18. Florella taking on Providence Christian. That game being forfeited by Providence Christian. So Florella gets the win there by forfeit. Jumping on down to Houston Academy taking on GW Long. GW Long handles business there, getting the win there, 38-7. Zion Chapel taking on Pleasant Home. Zion Chapel gets the win there easily, 41-14. And finishing it up, Laverne taking on Georgiana. Laverne getting the win there, 13-0.
Yeah, a few good games there out of Alabama. I hated to see that Columbia went down there to Cottonwood. But if you're going to lose to anybody, Cottonwood's a good one to lose to as far as just the rivalry goes there. That's a good one. Jumping into some of your Georgia scores here, local game here in near where I am at least. That was actually a Thursday night game. Was Westwood taking on Windsor. Westwood did fall in that one 26-0. Windsor looks to continue their role going there in that 8-man football league. Jumping around to some of your other games that we had coming up here. Tift Area Academy gets a win over Terrell Academy, 2 touchdowns, 14-0. Lee County beats Houston County 27-6, continuing that run for a state championship again. Early County big win over Berrien County, 70-20. Mitchell County beats up on Seminole County, 42-14. Wayne County falls to Coffee, 28-3. A couple of the other ones here. Colquitt County gets the win over Camden County, 34-13. Cook falls to Thomasville, 42-6. Mitchell County gets the win over Seminary, 42-14. I'm fairly certain I've got 2 scores for Mitchell County there. Fairly certain they were playing Seminole County in Seminole County there, so that was 42-14 against Seminole County. That other one was not a true matchup there. Let me see. I thought I had one other score that usually comes up for me that is not popping up here. Did you happen to see a final to the SGA game?
I did not. So I can pull it up real quick.
Usually it'll pop up here on the top for me, but it's not. I see what you're talking about. You did end up with a lot kind of over on yours. I guess sometimes it'll pop up on this one when I hit it. Sorry, you guys. Sometimes the stuff pops up real quick and easy, and we can have it for you just as quickly. And then other times it's a good bit slower for us. Let's see, Mongosaur. Nope, this is all stuff from, well, this should have been the scores. Let's see, there we go, it'll update it for me. But I still don't see their score. There it is. They beat Valwood 42-30. That was the other one that I wanted to see. SGA continues to roll on this season. It looks really good this season. And that's going to round up our Under the Lights segment there with our high school games. So that's it. That's for the most part what we've got for you guys. We'll pull up on our screen like I always do. You guys follow us on Facebook and Twitter at SEC Talk 20. Cody, you still with me? Make sure I hadn't hung up on you on accident there. Because,
yeah, I'm still here.
because sometimes that's easy to do.
Yeah, me.
Especially
Thank you, Michigan guys. Oh, what? Yeah, hello?
No, you're good. Especially when you're doing it the way that we're doing it. Sometimes it's a little bit tougher to keep up with everything. I'm clicking about 100 different things all at the same time here.
One day, guys, we'll have this professionally looking. We're working on it. We're in the works. Speaking of which, like you did mention, follow us on Facebook and Twitter at SEC Talk 20. And in the description of our podcast is a link to become a sponsorship. If you'd like to sponsor us, they do have multiple values there that you can select from. It's just something that we can go towards our show that we'll use to get better equipment and hopefully better service to give y'all the best quality that we can produce. As always, if there's anything y'all have questions about, comments, concerns, or just want to give us a shout out, you can message us on Facebook and Twitter or email us at sctalk20@gmail.com. Besides that, I think that pretty much wraps us up for the night, man.
That's it. Appreciate it, Cody. Y'all have a good one, and we'll check in with you guys on Friday.